Okay, so welcome to the show. If you are watching on YouTube, you are also, of course, welcome. And please consider subscribing to the channel, and then you will get automatic updates. And of course, why not sign up for the live event? It's the same time every week, because there is no substitute for a live event, particularly in these challenging times, as they say. Now, typically, after the end of a show, or when I'm thinking about it that evening or the following day, I get a feeling from somewhere about what the topic for the next week is going to be. And I became increasingly irritated with myself during the week because nothing was coming. And I thought I was probably going to have to invent something until synchronicity came to my salvation yet again. And I realized that why not have the topic of the show, irritability, and why I was feeling so irritable. Because in actual fact, there are some quite powerful messages here. We're all irritable. It's part of being a human being, I guess. And all cultures suffer from it. I mean, the Buddhists talk about, they don't mention the word irritability, but they talk about dukkha. They say our whole life is based around dukkha and the challenge of dukkha. And what literally they mean by dukkha is a wheel out of kilter. So if you are driving to and from work in a horse-drawn carriage with four wheels, which some people still do, I guess, a wheel out of kilter means that on a very long trip, you hear a thump every couple of seconds and another thump. And for the first few miles as they go happily by, you don't really pay much attention to it. But after a while, it becomes irritable and you're hating the next time that you're going to get this thunk and be jerking in your seat. Well, that's what the Buddhists say life is about. And we're not going to change the challenges. We're not going to change the things that make us irritable. All we can do is change the way we think about them. So I did a little experiment this morning, and I decided to go for a walk. Not a very long walk. I guess a round trip took me about 40 minutes. And I was going to count how many times I got irritable. Now, I figured that I might come up with one or two things, because in all due modesty, of course, I'm renowned for my legendary tolerance towards everything, including babies and dogs. Well, much to my horror, I got irritable almost every minute during that walk. Now, I guess you could say I was tuned in and I was subconsciously aware I was getting irritable about small things. But of course, ordinarily, I would have been walking around, but I'd have been just as aware unconsciously of things that were making me irritable. Now, I don't think anybody likes feeling irritable. There's nothing positive about it. And as I mentioned, we're all prone to it. But the thing is, if you could put your finger on it and kind of rub it away, then that would be all right. But it's a bit like a virus, this irritability thing. It varies second by second. And in one person, it varies during the day. Some days you're not irritable at all. And some days everything's making you irritable. And other days, some things make you irritable and some things aren't. There's no logic to it. So if you try and use logic to become less irritable, it ain't going to work. We've got to find something else. And in the West, where we are used to controlling stuff, I guess, particularly now, there's no shortage of suspects to fire us off. And in some ways, our society, not just in this country, not just in the West, is increasingly polarized. And this in some way might be due to social media, and in other ways, perhaps we've lost sight of the things that are important in life. Now, where does irritability come from in the brain? Well, it's got to be ego, because, going back to my earlier comment, it's about a control thing. And if we believe we're in control of everything, then everything that doesn't work out the way we want it to be is going to be a source of irritation. And of course, when we think about these things deeply, meditate upon them maybe, we recognize that actually there's very, very, very little that we're in control of in our life. There's very little we're in control of ourselves and our own emotions, and there's almost zero control we have over other people, just as they have very little control over how we're going to react. So that's kind of a lengthy introduction to my little walk this morning, and try that experiment yourself, and I imagine that you'll get pretty much the same results that I did. Now, as a performance coach, I take this more seriously because my job is to find ways to raise the performance level, particularly of elite performers, but of anybody. And I always say to everybody, and you've heard me say this on the show before, that I firmly believe that everybody is capable of raising their performance in whatever they choose to do, irrespective of their IQ, whether their education, whether they had any education or not, their work. We're all basically the same. We were created by evolution or created by God, whichever you believe. We were created to be perfect. And there's only one thing that gets in the way of that perfection, and that's us. So when I work with clients who are sports people in particular, I get the opportunity to watch them at their profession, because they're professional sports people. And I go on tour with them sometimes, or I watch their events. And I like doing that, even though it's pretty expensive to be on tour these days, because there is no substitute for seeing how people react when they're performing and when they're under pressure. And the thing that I always look at it, I never used this word before in my mind, but I'm looking for signs of irritability, or perhaps more commonly frustration, but I mean, frustration's almost the same. And I see we got Ray on the show, so this is a golfing story. Some of my clients are golfers on the tour, and I can pretty much predict what's going to happen. If I see a player, playing okay for the first few holes, but just missing the fairways a bit, missing the greens a bit, just missing those crucial putts, I want to know how they're going to react to this. If they can do the kind of exercise that we've talked about and keep calm, then I know that the tide will turn, because life is a game of chance and variance, and sometimes it feels like everything's stacked up against us. But if we can just work through that, things start going our way sooner or later. It's just I guess, science. But if I'm watching a player and they're becoming increasingly frustrated, I can pretty much predict what's going to happen within the next half hour or so. They're going to do something they wouldn't ordinarily do, and something that somebody much less skilled than them would do. And sure enough, that's what's happened. So a little bit of frustration nagging away sooner or later manifests itself into something far worse, which is harder to recover from. And so it is with all of us. I mean, if we live our life being irritable, we're not in that zone place. We're not in that place where flow happens. And sooner or later, it's going to cost us. We all know irritable people, and some of them appear to be very successful, and think, well, they seem to be coping all right, being like a person like that. But you don't see the whole picture. You're seeing a snapshot of what they want you to see. You don't know about their family life. You don't know about what they do when they're not working. You don't know what they do in the middle of the night when they're lying in bed, maybe worrying about stuff. These are things that we can't understand about other people. But the easiest thing is to recognize irritability, nip it in the bud, so to speak. And the reason being, and I think I put on social media earlier today when I was putting out a plug for the show, is discover how to embrace irritability as your best friend, or certainly as a friend, because you are not, if your life goes smoothly, if you're the four wheels on your wagon are running perfectly, life's going to perhaps be a little bit boring, but you're not going to be challenged. You're going to be in that comfort zone that we talk about so often. So irritability is an opportunity to exercise change in yourself. And when people exercise change in their self to aspire to a higher level, it usually works out pretty well. And this is where the magic of the work that I do and that many of you do too, as therapists or as partners or as mothers or fathers, we all have challenges and we all know when we can raise our game. And this is what the value of irritability, because when you learn how to control that, which isn't that difficult, when you learn how to control that even a bit, there's a magic payout. And that is when, going back to the golfers, that's when the ball starts going in the hole. And we can't really explain what's happened. All we've done is made people feel a little happier inside their own skin, but the payoff is considerably bigger. So that's why irritability was the topic and is the topic for today, because it's a small issue, it's relatively simple to fix, and I'll go on to that in a minute, and it's the shortcut to moving along your journey, what Carl Jung would call the individuation that we all live. I mean, most people do not want to be the same person all the time, from the time they're born to the time they go somewhere else. I think most people aspire to something. They may get blocked on many of the things that they want to do, but there's also always something that they have a particular interest and a passion for that they want to be better at. That's human nature. I mean, that's part of the perfect human being that we are, to be curious, to search out new stuff and to improve. Only ourselves can get in the way of that. So those are a few things for you to think about. Oh, I did mention, of course, the most important thing, what can we do when we find ourselves being irritable? Well, funnily enough, just by noticing it, you're almost probably 75% there to fixing it. Because mostly, as I mentioned earlier, we don't notice when we're being irritable. We just give vent inside our heads or comes out of our mouth sometimes. And no shortage of irritable people or things that happen. That will help, because if we think of it, then something kind of falls into place, perhaps deeper down in our mind. And if that doesn't work, maybe if the irritation is a bit stronger, then that's when we can go on to other things that we've talked about. We can go into our breathing techniques, our yoga breathing techniques, our heart math breathing techniques, or we can just do what Granny said and breathe deeper and breathe a little slower than normal. And as far as our body's concerned, do everything a bit slower, talk a bit slower, move a little slower, because these things will make us calm down and will take the edge off that irritable person or thing. So I don't think it gets any more complicated than that. Give it a go. Try the experiment when you're going out. Go for a tour around your local supermarket for 40 minutes, and you'll probably have more irritations than I had in my relatively civilized walk earlier today. Not sure anybody can handle that. It's probably best to be a bit blank when you go into a supermarket. Perhaps don't want all of these things hitting your conscious all the time. But if you're curious, give it a go. So hope to see you again next week. Have a wonderful week. Reduce the number of things that irritate you, and do not be surprised if your week is even more wonderful as a result of that. So thanks for joining us, and see you all next time.